Hello, welcome back to Cor Deo Online. We're going to look at Psalm number 29, a psalm that ultimately is designed, I think, to bring us real comfort. Now, this psalm is personally one that I'm actually excited to look at, because I feel like it's been 25 years in the making for me. 25 years ago, I remember standing with a group of friends as we were joining the OM ship, the Logos 2. We were in the Caribbean and we had an afternoon off of our pre-ship training, and we were down on the beach when this storm came out of nowhere, and it was overwhelming. And it was wonderful, actually, just standing in this storm, looking out across the Caribbean Sea and seeing the lightning and hearing the thunder. It was incredible. And we couldn't help ourselves. We started to sing a song that had words from this psalm. The song was Lord of Every Man. I honestly don't think I've sung it since that day, but I still remember it. And it was a song that used the words of Psalm 29, speaking of the voice of the Lord like thunder over the waters. And so I'm excited to finally, after all these years, look at Psalm 29 properly and actually do something with it. I've dipped in and out over the years, but this is a good psalm. I think you're going to like this. It starts with David crying out to the heavens, ascribe to the Lord, O heavenly beings, so the angelic hosts, ascribe to the Lord glory and strength, ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name, worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. And so he's speaking to the angels, the armies of God up in heaven, and saying to them, look, in your holy garments, ascribe to the Lord the glory that is due to his name. Glory connected to strength. And I think the reason he wrote this, kind of guessing, but it seems fairly obvious, was because David had just experienced a storm. The storm begins in verse 3 and it goes on through till verse 9. And what you may notice as you look at this is that there is a geographical progression. Not obvious to us if we don't know our Bible maps, but there's a geographical progression that is interesting, and a repetition of the phrase, the voice of the Lord. So let me read it through, and then I'll just flag those two details for us. The voice of the Lord is over the waters. The God of glory thunders. The Lord over many waters. The voice of the Lord is powerful. The voice of the Lord is full of majesty. The voice of the Lord breaks the cedars. The Lord breaks the cedars of Lebanon. He makes Lebanon to skip like a calf, and Syrian like a young wild ox. The voice of the Lord flashes forth flames of fire. The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of the Lord makes the deer give birth and strips the forests bare, and in his temple all cry glory. I want you to just notice here that there is a progression geographically. We've got a reference here to the many waters. Presumably this storm is building and developing and kind of coming together over the sea, the Mediterranean, the Great Sea to the west. And then it comes across land, but it doesn't come across Israel. It comes across Lebanon. Notice that there. And so we've got this reference here to Lebanon and to Syrian. Both are either mountains or mountain ranges north of Israel. And so you've got Lebanon, potentially Mount Hermon, but up north, up outside of the promised land. And so this storm is coming from the sea and across Lebanon, which isn't, Israel, isn't God's territory in the sense you might think of it. This is sort of the land of the Canaanites. The people there would worship the Baals, the Baals. And so it's across their land. And then it comes to Kadesh. We've got another detail here. This isn't Kadesh Barnea in the south. This is probably Kadesh further north. Again, the storm just moving across Lebanon and then dissipating into the wilderness. And so you've got all this description, the storm building and then the storm coming with such destruction, breaking the cedars of Lebanon, causing these mountains to skip, to sort of jump around, these solid things that seem so immovable in the midst of a storm, either as a sort of a trick on the eyes or maybe an earthquake that comes with it. Who knows? There's this movement that just is incredible. You've got the flames of fire, which of course is the lightning. There you go. Shaking of the wilderness, the voice of the Lord causing the deer to give birth. I don't think this is a sudden switch to tenderness because of what comes after it. I think this is still the powerful, thundering voice of God that startles the deer into maybe a premature birth. Hopefully, mother and child are doing well. Strips the forest bare. Like, this is powerful. And so you've got the storm rising over the sea, crossing over the land of Lebanon, and then dissipating into the wilderness. And the response to that is that in God's temple, where God is, the heavenly temple, everybody, all of those angels cry out, glory, recognizing the power of God. Now, one little detail that is fascinating, if you just look at that, is that the voice of the Lord has been repeated multiple times, in fact, 7 times. In Canaanite texts, apparently, I haven't looked them up, but in Canaanite texts, the sort of Baal worshipping stuff, there's a reference to the 7 peals of thunder of Baal. Baal was the storm god. And so when they wanted a rain, they would cry out to Baal. When there was a storm, they would cry out to Baal. That's kind of the way they worked. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel and the prophets of Baal desperately trying to get the rains to come. Well, here's a storm, and the storm goes across Baal's territory. And David's reflection is not to give any credit to Baal, maybe a passing dig by the number 7 here, but he says, no, that's the voice of the Lord. The God of Israel is the God who is in charge of everything, not just locally, but globally. The God who spoke creation into being with just his voice. Here his voice speaks a storm into being, and that storm comes and goes. He's in charge. It's the Lord of Israel who is in charge of the whole earth and everything that happens in it. And so David is crying out to the angels in heaven saying, you've got to worship him. You've got to give him the glory for his strength and his power. I've just witnessed it before my eyes. Then he goes in verse 10 to an interesting statement here. He says, the Lord sits enthroned over the flood. Well, is that kind of the flood of the rains that have come? Not really. The word flood here is always used of the flood back in Genesis. You see, the God who created everything, yes, he's able to bring a storm one Wednesday afternoon or whatever it was, but actually he sits enthroned over the whole of creation. The greatest catastrophe that this world has ever seen, the flood in Noah's day, God brought that because he's in charge. The Lord sits enthroned as king forever. He is the one who is on the throne. And so when there's a natural disaster, David says it's the voice of the Lord. Act of God, right? He is actually at work in this creation. And so David's reflection here is really quite striking. In verse 11, may the Lord give strength to his people. If God, implicitly the creator God, explicitly the God who brought this storm, a reference here in verse 10 to the God who brought the flood, if God is able to exert his strength in creation the way that David has just described, then he prays, may the Lord give strength to his people. By that same strength, if he's in charge of everything, he can give us strength for what we're facing. And if he's in charge of everything, not only bringing the storm, but bringing the storm to a close, then may the Lord bless his people with peace, strength, and the other side of that, peace. All the way through, he's talked about God's power to bring the storm, but if God brings it, God can take it away. It's interesting, it's so significant, isn't it, that every problem we face, whether it's a natural disaster or a kind of a man-made problem, whatever it is, every negative circumstance that we face is a circumstance within creation. The Lord sits enthroned over it. He is in charge forever. And so just as he is able to bring a storm and take a storm away, so he is able to give strength and he is able to give peace. That's the God that we worship. That's the God that we trust. Thank you.